My name is Jolie Hart, and if I'm honest, I spent most of my childhood learning how to shrink so my older sister, Ariana, could shine. She was the kind of girl people naturally turned toward bright, magnetic, impossible to ignore. At family dinners in Portland, relatives leaned closer when she spoke, their laughter always a little louder for her. I sat beside her like a softer echo, trying to catch whatever light she scattered. Back then, I thought that was love, making myself small so someone else could feel big. But something shifted when I began to grow into my own life. My grades caught up to hers, then passed them. Teachers started calling on me, scholarships arrived with my name printed in bold, and for the first time I felt the ground under my own feet. I imagined she'd be proud. Instead, her smile changed sweet on the surface, sour underneath, like fruit left out too long. What I didn't understand then was this. When you step out of someone's shadow, you don't just gain the light, you threaten the person who once controlled it. I wasn't competing. I was simply becoming myself. But to Ariana, my growth was a thief stealing what she believed belonged to her. Looking back now, I realized the message hidden inside those early years. Jealousy doesn't always roar. Sometimes it learns your habits, memorizes your weaknesses, and waits for the moment you finally stand tall just so it can try to cut you down. And the truth is, the first signs of sabotage didn't arrive with fireworks. They came quietly, like hairline cracks in a window small enough to ignore, subtle enough to excuse, but always spreading. It started my sophomore year, the same semester I finally felt like I belonged on campus. I remember opening my financial aid portal and seeing my scholarship refund smaller than it should have been. I stared at the number, blinking, thinking I'd miscalculated. When I called the office, the woman on the phone gave me a vague explanation about processing adjustments. Her tone was rehearsed, like she'd said the same thing 100 times. I hung up unsettled but told myself mistakes happen. Everyone makes them. But then came the email from the department about a missed meeting one I never scheduled, much less canceled. The wording didn't sound like me. It was curt, careless, almost smug. Still, I brushed it off. A glitch, I thought. Someone mistyped an address. Life is messy. Systems fail. People misunderstand. And I wanted so badly for everything to be normal that I accepted every explanation that allowed me to keep believing nothing was wrong. The next ripple hit harder. A professor approached me after class, asking if I needed support for the tutoring sessions I'd supposedly been advertising. I didn't tutor. I never had. When I told him that, he gave me a puzzled nod, the kind adults give when they're not sure if a student is lying or confused. His doubt lingered in the air long after I walked away. Soon classmates I barely knew glanced at me with wary curiosity. A girl from my lab group avoided eye contact altogether, as if something about me had become contaminated. I tried to ignore it, but isolation has a temperature, you can feel it even when no one says a word. I started checking my phone constantly, not waiting for a message, but bracing for the next strange thing to slip into my life uninvited. My roommate, Lena, was the first to say what I couldn't. "You're acting like someone's after you," she whispered one night as we sat under the dim string lights in our studio. Her voice was soft, but her eyes were steady. I wanted to tell her she was wrong. I even opened my mouth to say the words. But all that came out was a whisper. I don't know. Because the truth was beginning to bloom in the quiet corners of my mind, and I was terrified of the shape it was taking. I didn't want to believe sabotage was possible. I didn't want to believe someone cared enough to dismantle my life one thread at a time. And most of all, I didn't want to believe the person capable of it was my own sister. But the pattern grew sharper. My campus account locked me out for suspicious activity, even though I hadn't touched it in hours. Forms I had submitted mysteriously went missing. My behavioral analysis report, something I'd poured weeks into, was flagged under a plagiarism review. The night I learned that, I sat on the edge of my bed staring at my laptop, as if it had turned into a stranger. I emailed my professor immediately, my fingers trembling, explaining the work was mine. He replied kindly, telling me he believed me, but the investigation would move forward anyway because protocol demanded it. Protocol doesn't bend for fear. It doesn't bend for heartbreak either. That night, I lay awake replaying childhood memories, trying to reconcile the Ariana I adored with the possibility she might be behind these attacks. I thought about the way she used to braid my hair before school, her fingers quick and sure. I thought about the sharp comments she'd started making once my accomplishments began stacking higher than hers. I thought about the way our parents tiptoed around her moods, always adjusting themselves so she didn't feel overshadowed. And slowly, painfully, the dots began to connect in a pattern I no longer had the strength to deny. What made everything worse was how invisible it all looked from the outside. Sabotage leaves no fingerprints at first. Just doubts. Just whispers. Just a slow erosion of your sense of stability. When the world starts doubting you, you start doubting yourself. And when you start doubting yourself, anything can crack you open. But even then, even when every sign pointed toward her, I clung to the hope that I was wrong. I told myself Ariana was struggling, not destructive. Wounded, not malicious. Lost, not cruel. I wanted to believe that love, even complicated love, had limits. I learned too late that jealousy doesn't honor limits. It only honors opportunity. And the closer I came to graduating, the more opportunities she created to unravel me from the inside out. And the moment everything shifted wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't come with a confession or a confrontation. It arrived in the glow of a computer screen, in the quiet hum of a shared workspace where a man named Noah Vance tapped through my digital life with unsettling precision. I had been drowning in confusion for months, trying to make sense of emails I didn't write, appointments I didn't cancel, missing scholarship funds that no one could properly explain. And somewhere between exhaustion and denial, I finally understood I couldn't fight shadows alone. So I met Noah, a friend of a friend who spoke about cybersecurity, the way surgeons speak about anatomy, calm, exact, certain. He listened first. Really listened. I told him everything, every strange detail I'd tried to reason away, every uneasy moment I'd swallowed because the alternative hurt too much to consider. When I finished, he didn't dismiss me or call me paranoid. He simply said, if someone's been inside your accounts, they left footprints. People always do. And 3 days later, he proved it. I remember the way my pulse thudded in my ears when I stepped into that workspace. It smelled like old vents, coffee, and worn carpet, ordinary things, yet it felt like the threshold of something irreversible. Noah turned his laptop toward me, the screen filled with rows of login logs, timestamps, IP addresses I didn't recognize. These, he said, pointing at several entries, are not yours. His finger tapped each one, each tap landing heavier in my chest than the last. These logins came from a device on a home network in Portland. I didn't breathe. I didn't need him to say the next part, but he did, gently, as if trying to soften the blow. It's the same network your parents use. Something inside me folded inward, protective, like my ribs were trying to shield my heart. Because there was only one person in that house who had memorized my passwords years ago when I still trusted her with everything, my sister. Ariana had helped me set up my first email account. She knew my security questions before I learned the importance of changing them. She once joked that she knew me better than I knew myself. I never realized how dangerous that could be. Noah continued scrolling. There's more. His voice was steady, but my stomach tightened anyway. He pulled up a new window, financial records tied to my scholarship account. These withdrawal patterns aren't normal. Someone redirected payments twice. Twice. Not once. Not an accident. A pattern. A choice. Then he opened the mirrored email and address almost identical to mine, off by a single character. A manufactured shadow of my identity. Weaponized to impersonate me. The messages sent from that account were the very ones that had threatened to tear apart my academic standing. The canceled meetings, the rude responses I never wrote, the fabricated communications that painted me as unreliable, careless, dishonest. Whoever did this, Noah said quietly, knew exactly how to mimic your digital behavior. And they knew how to stay just hidden enough that you'd question yourself before you question them. His words felt surgical, precise, undeniable, cutting. I stared at the evidence, my mind spinning between past and present, Every doubt I had ever felt rearranging itself into a truth I could no longer escape. It wasn't random. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't something that just happened. Someone was deliberately dismantling my life. And that someone was Ariana. I walked out of the workspace trembling, the sun outside too bright, the air too sharp. My phone buzzed with a text from Lena. Are you okay? You've been quiet. I couldn't answer. I wasn't okay. I was standing in the wreckage of a truth I had spent months trying not to see. I drove straight to my parents' house, parked in the driveway, and stared at the porch light flickering in the early evening. My dad found me there, worry etched into every line of his face. He asked what was wrong, and I told him pieces just enough to explain why I looked like I'd survived a storm, but not enough to break him with the whole truth. I said someone had been tampering with my accounts. I didn't say her name. I could not yet, because part of me still wanted to believe she was hurting too much to see the damage she caused. That she wasn't cruel, just lost. But the evidence didn't lie. And when I returned to campus that night, something inside me shifted from fear to resolve. I gathered every screenshot, every irregularity, every trace Noah uncovered. I arranged them like armor, piece by piece. Then I contacted attorney Mara Reyes, a woman whose voice carried the kind of calm that comes from fighting battles without flinching. When she reviewed my evidence, she asked only one question. When do you want this to stop? And without hesitation, I answered, when it's no longer just me she can hurt. That was the turning point, the moment denial died and clarity took its place. The moment I understood that love does not excuse destruction, and truth, once uncovered, demands to be acted upon. Everything that followed, every confrontation, every consequence started in that single moment when the screen lit up, the pattern emerged, and the sister I thought I knew became the enemy I never wanted. And the morning of my graduation felt like the universe was holding its breath. The sky over Portland was clear, almost too clear, as if the world didn't know my life was balancing on a fault line that Ariana had been quietly carving for years. I slipped the envelope of evidence into the inner lining of my gown, feeling its weight against my ribs, a strange combination of burden and protection. I told myself I was ready. I told myself the storm had already passed. I didn't understand that the storm was waiting for a stage. When I arrived at the auditorium, the place buzzed with the kind of joy that should have belonged to all of us, students hugging each other, parents waving programs like fans, professors in bright regalia adjusting their caps. But threaded beneath the celebration was a pulse of dread I couldn't shake. Then I saw my family weaving through the crowd. My mom smiled too brightly. My dad hugged me too tightly. And Ariana, she stood just behind them in a white blazer sharp enough to cut glass, makeup flawless, posture rigid, eyes scanning the room like she was seeking prey. She didn't look like someone attending a graduation. She looked like someone preparing to host a spectacle. "Congrats, Jolie," she said, voice sweetened with something poisonous. "Thanks," I answered, steady. "It's a big day." Her smile flickered quick, sharp, rehearsed. In that split second, I saw her intention. She hadn't come to celebrate me. She'd come to finish what she started. I took my seat on the stage with the honor students, the lights warm on my face. From up there, the audience looked like a single shimmering ocean. Dean Matthews met my eyes and gave the faintest nod. He knew everything. We had spoken the night before. The truth was already set in motion. All I had to do was stand. As the ceremony unfolded, speeches, applause, the low swell of orchestral music, time felt strange, stretched thin and trembling. My name was near the end of the list, which meant Ariana had almost an hour to decide how she would break me. And she didn't wait until my name was called. She chose the moment when the room was quiet enough, reverent enough, for her voice to land like a blade. I heard the scrape first, her chair dragging back with a violence that sliced through the auditorium's calm. Then her voice rang out. She cheated her way through college. A ripple of shock tore through the crowd. Heads jerked toward her. Toward me. Phones lifted instantly, bright screens rising like 100 tiny judges. Ariana pointed at me again, her voice cracking into desperation. "She doesn't deserve that diploma. She lied. She manipulated the system. Ask anyone. For a moment, the world narrowed to a single inhale. I could feel hundreds of eyes flooding me with confusion, curiosity, even pity. But not one part of me crumbled. Not this time. I stood slowly, deliberately, the hem of my gown brushing against my ankles. My heartbeat was steady, too steady, as if my body had finally realized I didn't have to fight her on her battlefield. I stepped down from the stage, each click of my heel echoing like a countdown. Students shifted aside, some whispering, some frozen. But no one reached out. They waited to see if I would explode, defend myself, scream back the way Ariana wanted. But I didn't look at her. I didn't give her my fear. I kept walking until I reached the podium where Dean Matthews stood with a quiet, unshakable calm. Jolie Hart, he announced. The applause was hesitant at first, fractured by the tension Ariana had unleashed. I accepted my diploma, leaned in just an inch, and whispered, "It's under my seat." Envelope marked A19. He didn't question it. He simply nodded, the smallest gesture, but it shifted the entire room. That nod was the line between noise and truth. Behind us, security began moving through the aisles slow, measured, careful not to escalate the spectacle Ariana was desperate to maintain. She wasn't watching them. She was watching me. When the crowd didn't erupt in agreement, when the dean didn't recoil in horror, her face twisted into something raw and cracked. "You're all blind," she shouted. She's been lying for years. But the room had already turned. A professor shook his head. A journalist scribbled something that wasn't flattering. A woman lowered her phone, no longer recording Ariana, but studying her with discomfort, even pity. For the first time, Ariana realized she wasn't controlling the narrative anymore. She was unraveling it publicly, piece by piece. Security reached her row. One of them spoke softly, offering her the dignity she had never offered me. But Ariana didn't accept dignity. She swung between rage and disbelief, struggling against the truth settling over the auditorium like dust. "You think this is over, Jolie?" she spat as they guided her toward the doors. "You think that little whisper makes you innocent?" I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because innocence wasn't what I had brought with me. I had brought the truth. And truth doesn't shout. It simply stands. As the doors closed behind her, the energy of the room shifted not to celebration, but to understanding. People saw me not as someone accused, but as someone who refused to break under a public execution staged by the person who should have protected me. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt the weight on my chest loosen, not because Ariana was gone, but because I had finally stopped running from the moment she wanted to destroy me. And the hours after graduation felt strangely suspended, as if the world wasn't sure whether to move forward or hold still. When the ceremony ended, people drifted away in awkward clusters, some casting sympathetic glances, others avoiding my eyes altogether. I walked backstage where Dean Matthews waited, the envelope I'd hidden now in his hands. His expression was steady, the kind of calm reserved for people who understand that truth, once opened, can't be folded back into silence. "This is serious," he said softly. "So was what she did," I answered. And for the first time in months, I felt the words land without trembling. Mara, my attorney, arrived minutes later, heels clicking sharply against the floor. She opened the envelope, reviewing each document with the precision of someone who'd lived her life sorting real from false. Login records, financial discrepancies, mirrored emails, screenshots of messages I never wrote. Every piece pointed in one unmistakable direction. "She won't be able to spin this," Mara said. Not to the academic board. Not to a judge. Not even to herself. Her certainty settled into my bones like warmth after a long winter. The next morning, the investigation launched officially. My university moved faster than I expected. Administrators requested statements from professors, IT specialists, financial aid officers. 2 faculty members came forward, both admitting they had dismissed suspicious emails earlier in the semester because they didn't want to assume malice. The scholarship office traced the redirected payments to an account tied to a device on my parents' home network. And when Noah submitted his full digital report, the board didn't need a month or a committee or a debate. They needed a single meeting. The truth was a clean, sharp line. Ariana had accessed my accounts without permission. She had redirected scholarship funds. She had fabricated communications and lodged false complaints. She had interfered with my academic standing intentionally, repeatedly, obsessively. She had not only violated university policy, she had violated state law. The board issued its findings by the end of the week. Ariana was banned from campus indefinitely, flagged for administrative trespass, and referred for civil action. They didn't expel her because she wasn't enrolled. They couldn't revoke anything because she no longer had anything here to take away. But they could name what she had done. They could put it on record. They could say, without hesitation, that I wasn't the liar she tried to paint me as. That should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like grief. Because behind every line of the report was the reality that my sister, my own blood, had been willing to fracture my future just to ease the weight of her envy. Telling my parents was harder than facing the academic board. My mom cried first, small and disbelieving, the way someone cries when they discover a crack in something they thought was unbreakable. My dad asked for every detail, then asked again, as if repetition could turn the truth into something less devastating. At one point he whispered, "I should have seen it." But how could he? Ariana had always been the storm that disguised itself as weather too familiar to question, too close to fear. The fracture in my family didn't happen all at once. It split slowly, quietly, in the spaces between sentences. My mother tried to explain Ariana's behavior as pain, insecurity, confusion. My father tried to stay neutral, but neutrality was just another word for disbelief. For a while, we were four people orbiting around the ruins of what used to be trust. Meanwhile, Mara filed the civil claim. With the evidence so clean, negotiations lasted less than an hour. Restitution was ordered. A formal record was created. Ariana never appeared in person, she sent her lawyer instead. And maybe that was better. I wasn't sure what I would have felt if I'd had to see her across a table: anger, pity, or the hollow ache of mourning someone who still lives. When everything ended, I didn't celebrate. I packed my things and moved into a small apartment in Corvallis. Nothing fancy, just a place with sunlight that spilled across the floor in the mornings. I bought a secondhand table. I adopted a cat who behaved as if he'd been waiting his whole life to claim my furniture. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel dangerous. It felt like space. It felt like oxygen. It felt like mine. I thought the hardest part would be rebuilding my reputation. It wasn't. The hardest part was allowing myself to accept that sometimes the person who harms you most deeply is the one you spent your whole life trying to protect. And healing means letting the truth stand, even when the truth breaks the family you love. But I learned something in that stillness. Accountability is not cruelty. Boundaries are not betrayals. And blood is not a free pass for destruction. I didn't just survive what Ariana did. I stepped out of the shadow she tried to trap me in. And for the first time, I'm learning who I am without her voice echoing through every corner of my life. And the end of the investigation was not the end of the story, not for me, not for the girl who had spent years shrinking so someone else could fill the room. After the board's decision and the civil claim were finalized, I moved into my small apartment in Corvallis and let the silence settle around me like a new kind of weather. For the first time in longer than I could measure, I woke without checking my phone for the next disaster waiting to erase a piece of my life. The quiet was unfamiliar at first, then comforting, then essential. I didn't realize how much of myself had been bent around fear until fear finally loosened its grip. The apartment wasn't remarkable: thin walls, creaky floors, a window that stuck in winter, but every morning sunlight spilled across the hardwood like a quiet reminder that life still had gentle things to offer. I furnished the place slowly. A secondhand table, mismatched chairs, a stack of library books that kept growing even when I promised myself it wouldn't. Then I adopted a cat, a gray, self-important creature who strutted around as if he'd been appointed guardian of my recovery. He curled beside me at night, purring in that steady, unconcerned way that animals have, reminding me it was possible to exist without constant vigilance. Healing, I learned, is not a moment. It's a practice. It's choosing every day to release the version of yourself that was built around someone else's damage. Some mornings I felt strong, purposeful, certain that the worst had passed. Other mornings I felt hollow, as if grief had carved out a space inside me where something soft used to live. Losing Ariana, not to death, but to her choices, was a morning I hadn't prepared for. I kept replaying the girl who braided my hair before school, who shared secrets with me under blankets, who used to link her arm through mine when we crossed the street. I didn't know how to reconcile that girl with the woman who forged emails, rerouted scholarship funds, and nearly destroyed my future out of a hunger I couldn't understand. My parents struggled just as much. Calls with them were quieter now, careful. My mother's voice carried a sadness that sat between words, a sadness for a daughter she couldn't save from herself. My father apologized again and again, as if apologies could rewrite the past. I didn't blame them. Families are not puzzles you can solve by rearranging the pieces. Sometimes the picture changes, and you have to learn how to love what remains without pretending the missing pieces were never stolen. In the stillness of my new life, I discovered something profound. Survival is not the same as freedom. I had survived Ariana's sabotage long before anyone believed it was happening. But freedom came only when I allowed myself to let go of the guilt that wasn't mine to carry. I had spent so long protecting her image, her feelings, her pride. I had shielded her even as she carved at my foundations. And when I finally chose accountability over loyalty, I realized something I wish someone had told me years earlier. You do not owe your silence to the person who hurts you. With time, with space, with therapy sessions where I learned the vocabulary for wounds I had never named, I rebuilt my sense of self. I started writing again, not assignments, but reflections, fragments of memory, pieces of truth I had long buried. I began reconnecting with friends I had distanced myself from during the chaos. I walked through the small parks near my apartment, letting fresh air fill places that had been cramped with fear. I studied. I breathed. I lived slowly, quietly, authentically. And in that rebuilding, something shifted. I no longer saw myself as the girl Ariana tried to break. I saw myself as the woman who refused to shatter. The woman who faced a storm and kept walking. The woman who chose truth even when truth came with consequences. If there is a message in my story, it is this. The people who love you are meant to lift you, not hold you underwater. And the moment you stop shrinking for someone else is the moment you begin to rise for yourself. Standing up to someone who should have protected me didn't make me cruel. It made me whole. It made me honest. It made me free. And if you've ever been hurt by someone you loved, someone you trusted, someone you believed would never turn against you, hear me when I say this. You are not alone. Your voice matters. Your boundaries matter. Your story matters. I'm still rebuilding. I probably will be for a while. But the life I'm creating now, piece by piece, breath by breath, is finally mine. And that, more than anything Ariana ever tried to take from me, is the victory she can never undo.